In 1978, Ford would introduce an all-new vehicle called the Fairmont from the Ford lineup, and Mercury would call it the Zephyr, the so-called gentle breeze. Not really a great name for a car, but it was a revolutionary vehicle for Ford at the time. This was a compact vehicle that was based upon a new platform, the so-called Fox body. And for those who don't know, the Fox body platform would, yes, of course, span not only the Fairmont and Zephyr, but other vehicles like the Ford Mustang. However, the Fox platform would be employed on many vehicles beyond the Mustang, including eventually the Lincoln Mark VII and various Mercury Cougars throughout the 1980s, the Mercury Capri, just a whole host of vehicles from Ford that this Fox body would underpin. And it would end up being a very reliable platform. The last variant of the Fox body vehicles was produced in 1993. It was a Ford Mustang in that particular model year. But back in 1978, the Ford Fairmont and the Mercury Zephyr were actually praised in the automotive press for being compact, yet efficient, and relatively spacey on the inside, so that a family of four could, let's say, ride in relative comfort and get to where they needed to go without burning too much fuel. However, there are some elements of the Fox body platform or things that it introduced that really were abhorrent to customers. And let's take a look here at the interior of a Fairmont to describe a little bit more. Now, upon first glance, if you look at this basic Fairmont interior, there's nothing overly offensive, although it's a relatively cheap interior. And let's just say not one with a lot of design flair. Kind of a standard looking IP that has a very horizontal theme, a bit of the dual cockpit. The driver's area has a larger top pad associated with it. And the passenger section is pushed further forward, giving the passenger a sense of roominess. There's also a couple large round pods that, in this case, house the idiot lights as well as the fuel gauge on the left, the speedometer on the right. The door panels are relatively inoffensive, although I will say that the door handles there were kind of made of a cheap plastic that never really felt that good. And you also have what appears to be a relatively inoffensive two-spoke steering wheel. So what in the world is the problem associated with this particular Fairmont interior? Well, that two-spoke steering wheel and its design is really the problem. And what do I mean by that? It seems like it's an inoffensive design. Nothing really to complain about. Let's zoom in on the steering wheel on a different Fairmont. This one's a little bit sportier. It has some actual gauges in the left pod. Now, it's hard to read, but on one of the stocks there, you'll see that it says horn. Horn? What in the world am I talking about? That's right. The Fairmont and the Fox body platform was really responsible for introducing Ford in the U.S. to what was formerly a pretty European concept, and that is having the horn placement not on the horn pad or on the steering wheel anywhere, but on the column and on one of the stocks on the column. You would actually push that stalk inward to beep the horn. Now, this was something that Americans, like I said, had never really had a chance to get used to, but was relatively common in Europe. It was very common during the time in the U.S. If you wanted to activate the horn, you would basically just depress the horn pad. Earlier, some automakers, including Ford, had flirted around with the idea of a rim blow steering wheel where you would pinch the rim and that would honk the horn. But that was a failure, and automakers largely went back to just having somebody depress the horn pad or an area of it in order to activate the horn. But here, for 1978, Ford on the Fox body vehicles introduced something that would trickle throughout a good fraction of its lineup, and that is that stalk-mounted and activated horn. And here you have the interior of an early 80s Mustang, and you'd think that that center section of the horn pad would actually do something, but it really doesn't. It just has the cruise control buttons on the bottom two spokes, and then that center section is just padded for looks. But take a look at the stalk. You can see that there's the turn signal that it says that it activates left and right, or you kind of push that stalk up and down. It also is the bright light stalk. You pull it toward you. And then see the little horn emblem on the far left portion of the stalk? It's telling you to depress it in order to activate the horn. So here you are. This was one of Ford's, let's say, worst ideas of this particular generation. And, I have to say that this wasn't all that bad. The thought was that you didn't have to move your left hand from the steering wheel. Your left hand and your fingers can naturally touch that stalk for the turn signal clearly and for the bright lights. So why not just have it be able to activate the horn? It might even be faster than having your arm move so that you have to push it on the horn pad. But alas, customers would really just not like this idea, though Ford tried in earnest to get customers to convert. In fact, take a look here at this early 80s town car and this particular stalk that has been zoomed in. Notice the little horn signal there, where again, you depress the stalk inward and that would honk the horn. So very similar steering wheel, the 4-spoke steering wheel here. For whatever reason, Ford decided to put the cruise control buttons on the top 2 spokes on the Lincoln versus the bottom 2 spokes on the Mustang that you just saw. But in order to honk the horn, you would depress the stalk. And these also had kind of an awful feature, which was that tilt steering wheel that only tilted the steering wheel, didn't move the steering column. I just didn't think that was a great design, and it was rather cheap and not that effective. But, well, that's what Ford did during this era. Now, the town car was a Panther platform car that would be shared with the LTD and the Grand Marquis by this point. The Mercury Marquis, by the way, was a name that would be relegated to the Fox body cars when they were introduced. The Grand Marquis would become the Panther platform vehicles. But here you can see from a 1985 town car, look there at the horn pad. Now you can see the little horn symbols on 2 buttons that are on the actual steering wheel themselves. And Ford acquiesced finally to customer demands after the 1984 model year and dropped to this idea of the horn honking via that stalk entirely, and thank goodness. At this point, like I said, they had redesigned the horn pad. It looked the same, but it actually had functionality now. And, well, you can see what the result was. Happier customers across the entire lineup. And so the idea that was born in 1978 was gone after the 1984 model year and banished to history. One of the worst potential ideas for Ford. Although, like I said, for some reason, Europeans obviously got used to this, but for whatever reason, Americans couldn't. And they wanted their horn on the steering wheel, not on a stalk that you would have to activate with your finger. And I guess you can imagine that it was rather hard if you were in a tense moment trying to find the horn and you had driven other vehicles, especially if you were renting a car. Imagine if you were renting a car. This was a non-standard placement for anybody who was used to driving a GM or a Chrysler product. You get in the car, you'd have a moment where you need to honk the horn. You couldn't find it, didn't know where it was. Probably was very annoying for potential buyers of Fords or customers of Fords who are just used to having that horn placement in a specific location on the overall horn pad for many, many years, and then being forced to switch when they procured or they rented a Ford motor vehicle. And that concluded the interesting story of horn placement for Ford Motor Company. They had tried for several years in the early 1970s to have the rim blow horn. Then in the late 70s, they tried this particular concept into the 80s, in fact. And they kind of went back where they started, just having the horn activated by something on the steering wheel itself. And perhaps they never should have digressed into the other adventures, but they certainly did. What do you think about the horn placement on these Fords? Is it something that's abhorrent, or does it make sense to you overall? Perhaps my European friends and viewers of the channel will have a different viewpoint than those of us who are Americans, or at least stateside in the U.S. or living in Canada. Thanks again for watching. Put a comment in the comment section as to what you think.